Should we start soon? I'll try bringing up the presentation.
So, International Group of Insurance Professionals and Insurance Association of Pakistan, RCN, are arranging webinars on various topics of general interest of insurance professionals. Our presenter, Mr. Don George, will talk on climate change and insurance today. Pakistan is one of the most affected areas due to climate change, so it is the most relevant topic of the region. Mr. Don George is Vice President of Royal and Sun Alliance Insurance Agency, New York. Mr. Don George is CPCU, MS in Taxation, MBA in Finance, BA in Government and Foreign Carriers. He has vast experience in insurance and risk management industry. I welcome him on behalf of IGIP, RCN, Chairman, Council, and IGIP members for referring us such a good speaker. I thank all the team members of IGIP, RCN who managed the webinar, Mr. Khurshid Wan, Secretary IGIP Regional Committee North, and Mr. Imran, Deputy Secretary IGIP Regional Committee North. Mr. Timur Beg and Usman Khalil provide technology-related support. We are thankful to them. And now I will ask our speaker to start the webinar. Sir.
Thank you. You forgot to add really nice guy. So this is a presentation that I gave to the Risk and Insurance Council at Temple University that I updated for this group. So we'll go through it. I'm a liability guy, so it's going to focus more so on litigation issues, but it'll go into coverage issues of liability as well as some property issues for everyone. I know liability is not as prevalent outside the United States because of our heavy litigation climate as opposed to other countries, but it'll be interesting to see what's going on around the world. So first of all, the issue, and I'm sure, let me kind of get my box here. I don't know how to do that. Okay, so what's the issue? And I'm sure most of you know this, but I thought I'd just put this super cool graphic to show you. Humans cause greenhouse gases, which then form like a barrier that keeps the heat into the Earth's atmosphere. Now, you know, that's disputed by some, but that's a general theory among most climatologists. That causes climate change, which affects various issues. And we'll go over what some of the effects are. If you're interested in these effects and the assessments, here's a couple reports that have come out. The UN report on global risks about climate change. The World Economic Forum is very popular. And we'll take a look at some of the risks and how they're all interconnected. The Geneva Association, NAIC, which is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, has a report, as well as these other institutions. It's well worth a read to get on top of the issue because it's turning out to be a very important issue, especially here in the United States, and we'll go over why when we get to as we move on. So when you look at this risk, as we are insurance professionals, we have to look at whether it's a physical risk or it's transitional, if it's chronic or acute, and whether it's short-term or long-term. And you need to ask yourself these questions as you look at the litigation and the coverage aspects. So under the Biden administration, which here in the United States started in January 2021, so it's been about 18 months that they've been in power, climate is a cornerstone of the administration. And under President Trump in 2020, we left the Paris Agreement. In 2021, under President Biden, we rejoined the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is important, especially for litigation outside the United States, because that is a source of agreement among the litigants that they use to make their suit to get standing. So for the Biden administration, climate consideration is in all policy decisions, whether it be roads and infrastructure, innovation, our energy. The question is nuclear, they're kind of back and forth. And as we see gas prices rise because of their focus on climate change and elimination of fossil fuels, their stance on nuclear is back and forth. And there needs to be more climate reporting. Excuse me. So then we look at what ESG is, especially as is part of enterprise risk management. ESG deals with environmental, social, governance issues that when you're a big corporation, you have to look at how your corporation is in the social fabric of the world, and importantly, report that on your financial statements that you file with the various government entities here in the United States. And we'll go over what some of the directives are of the SEC, the SEC being the Securities and Exchange Commission, and some of the voluntary reporting. And there's even some entities out there which give scores to various companies on their ESG, how socially conscious they are, how keen to the environmental issues they are, etc. Importantly, kind of a backlash on ESG is starting now. For example, Sri Lanka, we all saw what happened there. They got an ESG score of 99. And part of their problem, not the entirety, was that they switched out chemical fertilizers, and this led to bad harvests. And that's one of the reasons that the people have revolted and the president has left the country for the Maldives, etc. So it's important that when you look at ESG that, the Biden administration is pushing this ESG issue, but there is backlash among companies, as we saw, and even countries. So what are some updates in this regard in 2022? Some big changes have happened here in the United States. First of all, there was a U.S. Supreme Court case decided 2 weeks ago, West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency. And they did not explicitly overturn or even refer to Massachusetts versus EPA, and we'll go over that in our U.S. climate change litigation. But the point was of West Virginia that they said regulatory agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency overreach. They have to look closely at what their mandate is from Congress. So while some people say the Supreme Court is overturning the EPA, essentially what they're doing is saying that Congress has to give them the authority to do these things. And in their view, in this West Virginia case that had to do with the Clean Water Act, they overreached, and it doesn't affect this important Massachusetts versus EPA case, which is important in U.S. litigation. The other thing is the Securities and Exchange Commission in March 2022 put out a draft. This is not yet a formal regulation, that companies, when they file their regulatory documents, their accounting with the SEC, which they do every quarter, have to talk about climate change and how their company is dealing with it. And this, to a lot of companies, is an overreach. And so you look at March 2022, they did this, draft regulation. Then the Supreme Court case comes, West Virginia versus EPA. And a lot of people are saying, well, maybe the courts will strike down this SEC thing so that companies won't be as climate change attuned as maybe they should be, or this regulation would require them to be. So what do these greenhouse gases do in terms of the weather here in the United States? Hurricanes, thunderstorms, tornadoes, you'll see that the activity has increased. So we look here, and not only has the activity increased, but this climate change is, according to the World Economic Forum, it's a web of risks that are associated with climate change. So you see here, the little green dot is climate change mitigation and adoption. And then everything's kind of related to it. Extreme weather, natural disasters. If you look up to the side, water crisis, infectious disease, global governance, the SEC issue that we talked about. On the blue side at the bottom, fiscal crisis, unemployment, they say is related to the failure of climate change, social instability, etc. All these major risks identified by the World Economic Forum are related to climate change. And here we go with, in terms of worldwide natural disasters are increasing. And the thought is that this is because of climate change, and the effect will, affect insurance companies, because for many of these natural disasters, and you see in the blue, the insurance part is a big part of the payment of these natural disasters. And here it is divided by types of natural disasters, also showing the increasing amount. And if you look at flooding, for the likelihood of levee failure and flooding over a 30-year residential mortgage, it is increasing. So we're looking at increasing insured payouts for natural disasters because of its purported climate change. And how does this affect our economy? Well, it affects our economic resilience because, as we saw, not all natural disasters are 100% insured. So the impact and then the subsequent recovery is affected. Okay. Oops. Oh, there we go. Now, climate change, the issue of whether humans affect climate change is still in dispute, and here's some alternative views. Stephen Conan, who was President Obama's cabinet, he says he doesn't believe that there's any change in if we could have a mute. Kaiser Khan, if you could mute it. There we go. And then Bjorn Lomborg out of, I believe he's Denmark. He's not someone who says that climate change is not caused by humans. He just says the Paris Accord and the Kyoto Treaty, which will cost a lot of money to the average citizen, maybe we should direct our money to things that can really affect the temperature. So let's stop here to see if there's any questions from anyone. Okay, I don't hear any questions, so let's continue. Oh,
Don,
wait.
I need to ask one thing from you, that according to the severities we are seeing in your presentations, I think so we need to focus more on the coordination between insurer, reinsurers, associations, and political governments of the world to face such severity. And second, spending more on reversing the climate change impacts. What do you think about these issues?
Right, and that's something that we'll go to is litigation and insurance coverage of those claims. Is that what you're looking for, as well as other litigation in other parts of the world, correct?
Okay, thank you.
So, and that's what we're getting to now is the litigation piece. So here you can go to this website, the Sabin Center of Columbia Law School, and they have categorized all the litigation in the United States. And there's basically two kinds of claims. One is security regulation violations. So we talked about SEC violations, and one group filed a claim against Exxon Mobil, the people of New York, to say that Exxon Mobil didn't properly file their SEC regulations. That was dismissed, the court said. So it doesn't seem like that's going anywhere. And then the other one, and this one is a theory that is worldwide, it's the nuisance theory, that fossil fuels cause emission of greenhouse gases, which cause climate change, which causes actual damage. So let's look at specifically the nuisance issue, since that's more of a worldwide issue. There's plenty of claims out there, and you can go to Columbia University's lawsuit to look at website to look at it. Here's what their website looks like, and you can see all the different links that you can go to. But let's go over the case law in the United States, and then we'll kind of talk about the theories internationally. So the first case is Massachusetts versus EPA. And what the US Supreme Court said is that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, but it's a political question that should be adjudicated by the EPA, not nuisance theory. And then came Connecticut versus AEP. AEP is a power company, and they said that same thing. Then Katrina came, and that's a hurricane that ravaged Mississippi, Louisiana area. And so this Commer filed the damages because of the hurricane against Murphy Oil. And they dismissed that case because they said it was a political question, not adjudicated under nuisance theory. And then one of my favorite ones is native village of Kivalina versus Exxon Mobil. This village is an island in Alaska, and they said climate change was raising the world's sea levels and gobbling up their little island. And so they sued Exxon Mobil, and they said that it was a political issue. And we'll get to coverage issues because these cases, the Kivalina case, one of the companies, it wasn't just Exxon Mobil, one of the companies sued before the case was adjudicated, sued their insurance company to say under a liability policy that there is coverage, but we'll get to that. Oh. Okay, so internationally, there are 884 cases in 24 countries. This source right here that I put here is a good source about the litigation. But I think we kind of touched on the Paris Accord, that it is a reason that outside the United States that people are suing governments. So if you look at the Netherlands is a key one, where in this case, Neubauer versus Germany, sorry, it was in Germany. They said that the 2% temperature 2 degrees, excuse me, temperature target of the Paris Agreement was not being reached. And in the Netherlands, they said the Dutch government had changed their task of meeting the Paris Agreement by 2030. So they sued also. In both those cases, they ordered the governments of the Netherlands and Germany to reconsider their tasks so that they can meet the Paris Accords. And we'll see in Southeast Asia that that is a similar way to get standing to sue. And then they use this same theory where these people sued Royal Dutch Shell. It was a D&O case that they, in their filings, they didn't meet the target of cutting global emissions. So Royal Dutch Shell lost that case. So coverage issues. You know, there's all kinds of non-traditional risks that are associated with climate change. So here's the only case really about climate change litigation that has been adjudicated about the Steadfast case. So the Supreme Court of Virginia looked at this case, and the reason that they brought this complaint was negligent and intentional conduct of the insured, which is a power company. AES was a power company. So first question, does climate change suits against the insured seek damages? And remember, in our liability policies here in the United States, we only pay money damages. We don't have equitable relief, which is that you have to change your tasks so that the power company needs to switch to sustainable power is not an equitable, that is an equitable relief, and it's not covered under the CGL policy. Then another question, this kind of is being brought up again because of the COVID-19 cases. Does climate change suits against the insured involve property damage? And they say physical damage to property, and they decided that it does not cause it. They referred to a New Hampshire case where CO2 was leaking from the insured's chimney, and even though the homeowners couldn't use their chimney, they could continue to live in their house, so it's not property damage. And then lastly, is it an occurrence? And they said that, and this is the big thing why they said there was no coverage for climate change under a liability policy, because it is not an occurrence. That's the key thing. Now, as we go forward, the court didn't answer this, but this is something that insurers are saying, is that there is an application of the pollution exclusion, because if you look at what the pollution exclusion on a U.S. liability policy defines: smoke, vapor, soot, fumes, acid, alkali, chemicals, and weight, that pretty much defines what's causing the climate change. So they say that it's not covered because of the pollution exclusion, in addition to it's a continuous and repeated exposure, so there's no occurrence. And now as we move forward, you know, more and more governmental bodies are requiring guidelines for companies to talk about climate change. We saw those, that SEC March 2022 draft regulations, and whether those will hold, as well as the New York one, based on this new Supreme Court case, is to come. Now, from a property side, with increase in frequency and severity of natural disasters, the amount of payouts for insurers worldwide will significantly increase. If you see this little circles here, it was projected to increase without the effect of climate change from 6 billion to 52 billion. But now that we have climate change, what they're purporting in this white paper is it'll go from 6 billion to 1 trillion. So let's look at the international coverage issues. Globally, there's more cases. It has been an instrument to enforce climate commitments made by governments. So what people are doing generally is asserting litigation against governments to adopt climate change initiatives to reduce the effect of climate change. But additionally, against private companies, they have sued not only fossil fuel companies worldwide, but food and agricultural, transport, plastics, and finance. They continue to rise, and most of the commonalities deal with getting companies that rely on gas removals or negative emission technologies. They explicitly concerned with climate and biodiversity. The big thing is that they're looking at the Paris Accords rule that, you know, you have your health and it's a human rights issue. So we'll get to that. So like I said, it deals with the Paris Agreement, and they're suing. So they use existing climate commitments made by governments in Southeast Asia to produce it, and we'll look at that in a little bit. So against private companies, they're, we talked about nuisance claims. They're using that, but also human rights-based claims. Wrongful damage to forests in Indonesia was one, and enforcement actions, and cases involving carbon credits. Against government, they say they have a constitutional right to life, and that's kind of based on that Netherlands case, where they said that since the government of the Netherlands agreed to the Paris Agreement, that ties into human rights, and because they weren't meeting their Paris Agreement, goals, which is, it's a 50% decrease in greenhouse gases, that it was a human rights issue, and that's they're winning these cases. Here's some examples of standing, because that's a big thing. How do you get standing? We saw in the United States that the Supreme Court said they don't have standing, but in Pakistan, for example, citizens seeking to enforce human rights, the court said they had standing. This one in India, consistent with their prior interpretation of authority, standing was not an issue, so they got standing. And then Greenpeace, this is a big one, the Greenpeace one in Colombia. I'm sorry, Greenpeace is in Philippines, and then a Colombian case, they got standing. And then lastly, here in India, the actual case continued, and it talked about environmental harms were made likely by climate change, and that citizens are entitled to a wholesome, clean, decent environment. And the court concluded that the government had violated its obligations of, whatever it is, to have a wholesome, clean, decent environment, and so they ruled against them. So, whoops, any questions? I will stop the share. Any questions out there?
Hey, Don, this is Heather. I would just say I have a particular interest in climate change risk, mainly just because some work that I'm involved in right now. And knowing the litigation and the legal aspects of climate change, what do you feel is insurance companies' responsibility today in figuring out ways to help their customers to recover from the impacts of climate change, regardless of whether or not we believe it is what it is? You know, we know that the weather's worse, and what is our responsibility in that space?
Well, I think that depends on each insurance company. I know Zurich has a person designated as like a climate czar who's to show what their responsibility is. Additionally, I know Tony Cabot, who you may know, is big on the UN sustainability project, and many insurance companies have signed up for that, including mine, Royal and Sun Alliance. We signed up for sustainability. Interestingly enough, though, the companies that have signed up for the UN sustainability project are almost all European insurance companies. Those are the ones that have made the commitment. I think just pretty recently out of the EU came some like draft guidance for insurance companies on what they need to look for in solving this climate change issue. And I saw a response from FIRMA, which is the European Risk Management Association. They're kind of saying, well, this is a little bit too much, you know, why don't you scale it back? So this hasn't been decided, but you know, to the extent that companies feel that they have some responsibility, I think it is growing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I want to add something in that question. I think though from the court of law, companies have their wording which helps them to escape from the liability side. But as an insurer, since losses are happening around and people are facing unprecedented losses and severity, I guess insurance companies should involve in the risk mitigation and other form of things to reverse the impact. Sir.
No, I think you're right. Like I showed in that little bubble slide that, you know, it's going to significantly increase our property payouts. There hasn't been any movement to reduce claims under property because of flood or hurricane, whether it's related to climate change or not. But it is a big issue. I know my new company, Intact Insurance, has been looking at that very closely, and you know, has initiatives to review it. But so I think you're right. It's property losses are going to skyrocket.
Okay, Mr. Don George, this is Ayaz Munir. I have a question. May I pose, sir?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, what do you think about the future of climate change and insurance put together? And by that, I mean, do you think in future insurers would be able to, you know, insure the risk related to climate change? Now, there was a statement, I think about 1 or 2 years back by Christian Mametholer, who is the CEO of Swiss Re, and he said that maybe in the long run, the climate change, the effects of climate change would be so much that insurers in particular may not be able to bear those losses because
Oh, you're breaking up. Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your question. You're breaking up. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't hear the last part of your question. You were breaking up there, but I think your question is, will climate change affected losses become uninsurable? And I think you bring up a good point. If we look at other uninsurable issues such as nuclear or terrorism, or there's even a movement on communicable diseases that many people think this is the role of governments to put out a pool. So you look at the UK, they have Pool Re to cover terrorism. There's the U.S. government for flood has the flood plan that people can buy flood insurance from, mostly for residents. But I think you're right that it'll be the role of the government. I see, Denise, you have a question.
I was just going to add to the discussion as it pertains to ability to continue insuring. I'm in California, and we've had year after year after year after year after year of wildfire disaster. And I can tell you that fire insurance in California is extremely difficult to get right now. On a personal lines basis, much of it is going to the state, it's called the FAIR Plan. And then on the commercial side, the costs are going through the roof, and we're having to layer coverage with pretty high deductibles. So it's becoming very, very difficult to place, and in some areas impossible.
And it kind of goes back to the question is, will it become insurable by private insurers? I think you're right, Denise, that we're going to see a movement towards government setting up their own insurance companies like Florida did with Citizens to cover hurricane and property insurance in Florida. And you're saying it's going to the state, so maybe they have a remedy for private residences. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think you're right.
Yeah, very expensive. I can tell you, I'm in a high risk area. I still can get my insurance through the standard market. However, my premiums went up from $1,200 a year to like $5,000 a year.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. I have to pull from savings to pay the bill.
So I think you're right. And, then the question is like flood insurance here in the United States is very low, which is good for the people who have, flood affected houses. But then taxpayers have to support that because where does the flood insurance plan make up the difference between the premiums they're charging, which are too low, is through taxpayers. So then the question is for California, if they set up some sort of government insurance company to make premiums reasonable, maybe not down to $1,200, maybe $2,000 instead of $5,000 for you, Denise, with the taxpayers that are not affected by the wildfires pitch in for that or agree with it. So that's a very good question. Thank you. Any other questions? So back to you, Zulfikar, if you want to do some more comments.
It's a good aspect that you have discussed today regarding the liability side. Usually we see with the climate change more often the property side only. And I have one more thing in my mind that in most of the cases, the world we are living, people blame it like act of God. It's not a problem created by man, according to many of the people. But I think so. It's the man who is creating the climate change by poking their nose in the nature, trying to do things differently. What do you think, sir?
Well, I think, like you said, there are other views, and we highlighted Mr. Lomberg and the other guy who was in the Obama administration. The guy in the Obama administration is a climate change denier, and he shows research that going back before the huge human fossil fuel usage, that climate was changing just as much. Bjorn says that, he agrees that humans are causing climate change, but let's direct our money to achievable goals rather than the Kyoto and the Paris Agreement. So there are other opinions out there. I think the takeaway maybe is not, are humans causing it or not, or are they? That's something you can talk about at the dinner table or at the coffee house or whatever. I think more importantly, we're seeing the losses skyrocket for insurance companies where we all work or have dealings with. And how's that going to affect them if they have to pay more? We saw that 1 trillion for property damage. We're seeing for outside the US that liability claims are skyrocketing, 488 cases, I thought. So the big question is, what's the effect rather than what's the cause? I think we need to look at the cause to see how we can accommodate it. And I kind of am in the camp of Mr. Lomberg, where we should direct our money to mitigating climate change, but the things that really are achievable goals rather than the Paris Agreement. 50% decrease maybe is by 2030 is too much of a goal. Is that your question, really?
Anyone else have a question? If someone have questions, we should ask more. I guess some written questions are there. If you see the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me.
Hey, Don, this is Mickey. I'll make a comment if that's okay.
Sure, please.
And I really empathize for California with the wildfires, a lot of which it was very clear they were also caused by the power companies because they did not maintain their system infrastructure and they did not cut back the vegetation. So we need to look, I think, as a whole at power generation and energy usage. And I'll throw this out here as another controversial topic. I think nuclear power is pretty clean and safe. Some countries use it successfully, other countries ban it. Just as a topic of conversation, how do we generate our power? Because that has an impact on climate. Another interesting point is here, and I live in Georgia in the South USA, we've had a real growth in EVs, electronic vehicle manufacturers and battery manufacturers. So there's a big push to move to electric vehicles away from the fossil fuel vehicles. However, a big problem that we have here in the States and rest of the world is when you charge your EV, most of that power is still ultimately being generated by coal. Coal is fueling all the power plants around the world, which it's pretty clear causes some harmful emissions. So I just throw those comments out for the group and curious as to discussion.
No, I agree with you, Mickey. If you look at Europe with the effect of the price of oil, you look at France is now almost 90% nuclear to avoid buying Russian oil. You look at Germany has reduced their oil consumption of Russian oil, and they've moved back to nuclear and coal. So yeah, it's absolutely an issue that, the price of oil, one of the reasons it initially went up before the Ukrainian-Russian issue was the climate change initiatives by the Biden administration, and how it affects the worldwide price of oil. Although now, the price of oil is going down. So we'll see what happens. Good points. Anyone else want to comment on Mickey's thoughts?
Don, it's Elaine George. I
Hi.
actually do agree with Miki, especially when it comes to the EV vehicles. We don't think how they're fueled, or we drive around thinking, oh, we're saving the planet. But really, are we saving the planet or not? So, Miki, thank you.
I think also something to consider is that for myself included, to buy a $60,000 car, which is the average price of a car that runs solely on electric, it's not obtainable for someone in my salary bracket. So that's another issue. And even if you could buy them, they're not readily available, right, Elaine?
I would know. I did try to buy one.
Well, and then in California, we have the blackouts. I mean, they do the rolling blackouts where you don't have access to any power.
Oh my goodness.
I'm interested in hearing from the folks though in Pakistan and the surrounding areas. What are you seeing in your region? We're hearing a lot from the folks in the US. Educate us a bit about what's going on in the region there.
Thank you, Ellen. In our side, there is extreme weather now. In the month of May, June, we have extreme heat waves and very hot weather. Then suddenly we have rainfall and extreme rains throughout the country. Right now, we are in the flood. Most of the regions are flooded. We are seeing flash flooding, we are seeing urban flooding, and we are even seeing the flooding in those areas where we never expected a flood. More rain cycles are coming inside Pakistan and the countries attaching with the Pakistan, like India and other countries. So we are facing trouble, you can say, from that global environment change or climate change.
Is the flood insurable, and is it insured? Did people take up that if insurance companies offer it?
Sir, right now we are offering flood and storm together in the name of atmospheric disturbance cover with the fire and the light peril policies in Pakistan. We are not much affected before because there is a little bit of insurance of the properties, not that common as you people have in US, that every house, every bit is insured. We usually have insurance only where bank financing is involved in the big or multinational organizations, not with the common people in personal lines who are far, far, far away, still not progressed. So not hitting too much. So reinsurers are still willing to insure, and maybe in future, after seeing huge sizes of losses, we will see a hard market like we are facing now in fire insurances because of huge fires we have seen in the current year.
And then it also brings up another issue with inflation. The value of insured value of properties is increasing also, and that's just going to increase your premiums even more, right?
Well, just to add to what
You're right in that way, and also I will add, and seeking help from the alternate energy sources. So they are burning everything they can to get energy, like fuel in the boilers and other things. They are also hitting the climate, you can see.
Some more comments?
Well, just to add to what Mr. Zulfikar was saying about the situation in Pakistan, if I could add a little bit, we are having the worst of the times for the past few decades. Across the country, we are seeing in my city, or my own city, Karachi, which is the largest city in Pakistan, we are seeing record rainfall, which didn't happen in the last 15 to 20 years, because of which there has been immense damage. Similarly, not just on the at the time of summer, we are seeing its effects in the time of winter as well. Places like Quetta and other big cities of Pakistan are facing immense, how should I say, snowfall. Just about 2 years back, there was a 30-year record that was broken, because of which there has been immense snowfall across the areas, because of which we are facing things like loss of life, as well as supply chain issues and things like that. So yeah, that's always been there. But the part about Pakistan is much of it is not insured, as Mr. Zulfikar was saying. The insured losses have been very few, but the economic losses are continuing to grow every year. And obviously, if we have to really take those economic losses towards the insured losses, that will be a major issue for us to take into consideration, especially as far as how to price and mitigate the risks are concerned.
No, I agree. Thank you. I think that's all we have, Zulfikar, if you want to wrap it up with some comments.
You're muted, Zulfikar.
I think you're on mute, Zulfikar.
Yeah, you're muted, Zulfikar.
Okay, everyone.
Oh,
Thank
there you go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Great session, Don. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I'll send out the PowerPoint to Zulfikar. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dawn. Thank you,
Bye,
Zulfikar.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. God
Bye.
bless. Bye. See you again.